Hi guys, I am responding to the discussion post for this week, and it starts by asking what are the confidentiality issues that arise when working with children, vulnerable adults, groups, and families. And there were several sections of the ACA Code of Ethics that discuss this. The first one being B5C, where it says to seek permission from a third party for those children and vulnerable adults before you disclose information, and then also to inform the clients consistent with their level of understanding. So they would have somebody consent for them as a third party, but then you can explain what that means as best you can to that client. B4A talks about group counseling, and when you're working in those situations, how it's important that the counselors explain confidentiality to the group, and that's an understood norm for that group. B4B talks about couples and family counseling, and how in those situations that there needs to be an understanding of who the client is, and that the expectations of confidentiality around that client, or that the family unit or the couple unit is the client, and so then the confidentiality stems for the whole group. And Remley and Hurley, it points out some other codes that are important as well, and that is A2D, where it's the balancing the rights of the minor client with the rights of their parents or guardians. And this includes minor clients in the decision making. So clearly, as minor client, we want to make sure their needs are being met, but we also want to make sure we're upholding the rights of the parents as the parent. And then B5B talks about respecting the inherent rights of the parents and guardians, because ultimately, as parent, you are responsible for that child, and so respecting that kind of inherent right. But main thing that the book talks about is that when we approach this together as allies, there's a lot less issues. So making sure that the parents and the children are on the same page, or the third party representative and the vulnerable adults are on the same page, and you're working together as a team and including each other in the decisions, and that's most beneficial for clients and parents, or whatever the case may be. Remley and Hurley also talks about how counselors have to understand that if they decide to withhold something from a parent, especially in the case of a child, if they withhold information from a parent, they're assuming the responsibility for harm caused if that information leads to injuries to the client. So if we choose not to tell a parent something because we don't think that we don't think that that's something needs to be shared, then we take on that responsibility, which is ultimately, we do that for all of our clients as well, but especially with children, it's an extra layer there that we have to, it's not just the child or the client, it's the client and the parent. And then the last thing is the second question, which is issues pertaining to informed consent when working with children and vulnerable adults. And so what I kind of wanted to focus on here is school counseling, because that's mainly what I'm looking to go into. And there was an article that I read on Lur et al., or by Lur et al., that said, as school counselors, we have to understand that the parents have rights as well. Parents can request to see counseling records. They can request to get the information that, we talk about with our students, but that also students have an understanding of what informed consent means too. And as long as counselors are talking about that to the student and explaining what that means, and those parameters that, those have to be the guidelines for that communication in a school counseling setting. What this article talked about, though, was how what we call a mature minor, and typically that is like around the age of 16, where they are able to understand exactly what informed consent means and what happens if information is released to others, and they have that right to say, I understand that, and so therefore there's not as much of a need to consult a parent to counsel that child. And so this was actually based on Canada law. So they talked to a bunch of school counselors about, how do they approach these situations and stuff. And a lot of counselors said that, in the elementary and middle school levels, there is more of a need to get that parent consent. But as they approach secondary school and high school, it's not as big of an issue because those students understand, that what they share, the confidentiality piece of that, when that confidentiality is going to be broken, what happens if they share something, and what it could be, what are those reasons why that information might be shared. And so the big, the big thing at the end of the article was the right to know must be balanced against the expectations, benefits, and risks of that child's privacy. So is what is being talked about important enough that that outweighs that relationship with that child and that confidentiality piece? And also encouraging those children to include their parents. So if it's not a discussion about harm, like if the child's not talking about harming themselves, but another concern that it might be beneficial to include the parents in that discussion, like, oh, your parents could help in this way. Could we talk to them about this too? And giving that kind of control to that student to have a say in that, but also encouraging what what could be done. So those are just some of my thoughts on the confidentiality and informed consent of children, vulnerable adults, groups, and elderly. So thank you for your time. Have a great night.